So I saw that there was some big tax mega bill going through Congress or whatever. The way it was presented to me was that it was a tax bill, but this article is calling it a domestic policy bill. So I guess there's a lot more in it other than just tax policy. Um, Tax policy is where I love to be. So we're going to talk about this, and hopefully this article will give a good understanding of what exactly is in this bill and if it is good or not. Republicans' mega bill to enact President Trump's agenda began coming together this week as three committees released, debated, and approved critical pieces of legislation that House leaders had hoped to bring to a vote as soon as next week. But that effort hit a major roadblock on Friday after conservative Republicans on the House Budget Committee blocked the legislation from coming to the floor, demanding changes to the bill and forcing party leaders to the negotiating table. Effort hit a major roadblock on Friday after conservative Republicans on the House Budget Committee blocked the legislation from coming to the floor, demanding changes to the bill and forcing party leaders to the negotiating table. The legislation currently written would slash taxes while providing the biggest savings to the wealthy and steer more money to the military and immigration enforcement while cutting health, nutrition, education, and clean energy programs to pay for it. Wow, all this seems it's like they took the little pieces of what everything they've done so far and put it all together into one big thing. Major portions of the sprawling package remain unresolved amid Republican divisions over cuts to Medicaid and details of the tax plan, among other issues. The changes that the hardliners on the Budget Committee are calling for, including speeding up when new work requirements for Medicaid would kick in and a wholesale repeal of the Inflation Reduction Act, could very well alienate more moderate Republicans whose support is also critical to passing the legislation. Republicans are pushing the package through Congress using a special process known as budget reconciliation that allows them to steer around a filibuster and win approval without a single Democratic vote. But with tiny majorities in both chambers, they can afford to lose no more than 3 Republican votes in both the House and the Senate. The first test will come in the House, where leaders will have to push the legislation through the budget panel and onto the floor. Here's a look at the bill and the biggest remaining areas of disagreement within the party. Cutting taxes. The bottom line, the heart of the bill is a roughly $3.8 trillion tax cut that would lock in many of the tax cuts Republicans passed in 2017, including lower marginal income rates, a larger standard deduction, and a higher threshold for the estate tax, with some tweaks. Okay, hold on. Go piece by piece. Including lowering marginal income rates. I don't know what that means. A larger standard deduction. I guess that's a good thing. That's good for everyday people. And a higher threshold for the estate tax. That's not a good thing. Uh, I'm very much in favor of things like the estate tax, so I'm not. That's not good to me. But maybe we'll go into that in more detail in a bit. The measure also includes several new temporary tax cuts that Mr. Trump campaigned on, including his promises not to tax tips or overtime. His pitch not to tax Social Security benefits takes the form of a bonus $4,000 deduction available to Americans over 65, with the benefit shrinking at higher income levels. Wait, his pitch not to tax Social Security benefits. Americans would also be able to deduct interest on car loans from their taxable income, though the car has to be made in the United States. Deduct interest on car loans. Seems like kind of a neutral one. The reductions would last only through 2028, as would a $1,000 addition to the standard deduction and a $500 bonus to the child tax credit, which now makes out to $2,000. Children born over the next 4 years would receive $1,000 deposited in a so-called MAGA account that is invested in the stock market. That is such a terrible idea. That is such a terrible idea. There's a reason why we don't put taxpayer treasury money straight into the stock market. We don't want to pump that. We don't want to pump the stock market in that kind of way. We don't want to institutionalize the stock market any more than it already has. The stock market already is, unfortunately, sort of an integral part of the way our society functions. It's not going away anytime soon. That's not a good thing, though. It didn't always used to be that way. Businesses would receive several tax cuts, including valuable deductions for research and investment spending, as well as a new tax break for building factories. A deduction available to the owners of many businesses would become slightly more generous and be extended indefinitely. The bill also includes tax hikes on universities, non citizens, and some families with children. The tax on the investment income that university endowments earn would rise substantially from 1.4% to as high as 21%. That is a terrible. Why would they want to raise the this is I think it's lazy when people characterize the way the Trump administration is attacking universities and our whole educational system as attacking the educational system or whatever. I think a lot of the times when they do that, they're purposefully removing any nuance from the conversation. But this really is an attack on universities, on our overall education system. How could you possibly? What is the steelman argument? The only argument I could possibly imagine for this is that they think that with the whole woke propaganda argument, that they think that these universities are Marxist woke indoctrination machines, and that they should, to that extent, remove their ability to function as much as possible. And one of the ways to do that is to raise the taxes on their endowments. That is the only argument I can possibly think of. It's so silly. It's the only argument I can. Why would you do this? Immigrants authorized to live in the United States who are not citizens or green card holders would be barred from receiving tax credits covering the cost of health insurance premiums. My understanding is that that is already the case. If you don't have a social security number, you're not able to access almost all federal services like that. I don't know why they why they even add that in the article. And tighter eligibility rules for the child tax credit would take the benefit away from roughly 2 million children. Eligibility rules for the child tax credit. What eligibility rules are they talking about? Hold on. Child tax credit eligibility. Okay, so you're able to receive the full tax credit up to if you make up to $200,000 a year. So basically everybody who wants this tax credit can receive it. But what are the restrictions it's going to put on it moving forward? It just says tighter eligibility rules. I wish it went into more detail. The biggest problem for the tax plan for now is the state and local tax deduction. The bill would triple the current $10,000 limit on the tax cap to $30,000. But a group of holdout Republicans from high tax states like New York have demanded an even higher increase to the cap, a challenging prospect for Republican leaders who also need the support of conservatives who hate the expensive tax break. Scaling back Medicaid. Wait, let me read that part again. The biggest problem with the tax plan for now is the state and local tax deduction. The bill would triple the current $10,000 limit on the cap to $30,000. Okay, so they're talking about the SALT deduction. That makes so much more sense. Okay, so basically, the SALT tax deduction is basically, um, you can say like, oh, I paid $10,000 in taxes to, Texas state or whatever state you live in. And when you file for your federal taxes, it can count as a deduction. And so you wouldn't have to pay quite as much federal taxes as a result, um, because you've already paid the state taxes. Um, so that makes sense then that the Republicans in high tax states want to raise the cap because they want to increase the amount of money that you're able to exempt yourself from being taxed federally. Um, but that makes sense. I'm surprised that even some of them are, it says a challenging prospect for Republican leaders who also need the support of conservatives who hate the expensive tax break. Um, I don't think they do hate the expensive tax break. They seem to be interested in getting tax breaks at all. Give me tax breaks regardless of what else happens, at the cost of everything else. And so it surprises me that they're saying that they're having some pushback against it because of that. It surprises me. The bill makes major changes to reduce the cost of the health insurance program for the poor and disabled. The centerpiece of those efforts is a strict work requirement for childless adults without disabilities, which would require beneficiaries to document 80 hours of monthly work or prove they qualified for an exemption or else risk losing their benefits. So you got to go slave. You got to go be. You have to go slave to a capitalist. You have to spend at least 80 hours of your month um, you have to donate it to a capitalist um, to have to have the ability to have access to healthcare that isn't going to put you into medical debt. Um, that's what the poor's get. Those new rules would not kick in until 2029 after the next presidential election. Oh, very convenient. Very convenient. He wants to do this, and the Republicans want to make this change, but they don't want to actually eat. They want to pour the bowl of cereal, but they don't want to eat it. It's so cringy. More immediately, the legislation would make it easier for states to cancel people's coverage by allowing them to increase paperwork requirements and drop those who don't respond to requests to verify their income or residency. It also would require states to impose copayments for a wide array of medical services for adults on Medicaid who live above the poverty line, a policy some Democrats described as a sick tax. Another provision would, yeah, what the heck? So basic, what to the extent that Medicaid is supposed to be an insurance alternative, you're literally watering it down by creating a copay situation. They don't have that for traditional insurance, as far as I understand. You have like premiums and deductibles and whatnot, but like it's not like they're like, oh, if you break your arm and you have to get like a cast or whatever, that you're required to pay for 50% of the cast or whatever. But like, if you need a liver surgery, we're going to pay for that. Like, that's not, I don't think they parse it out like that. And rightfully so. It'd be really weird if they did. Another provision would reduce Medicaid funding to states that use their own tax revenues to provide health coverage to undocumented immigrants, a change that could affect financing for 12 mostly Democratic controlled states. That is really sick because to the extent that any state would choose internally to create a healthcare program for undocumented immigrants, it's acknowledging that these undocumented immigrants, these illegal immigrants, whatever the heck you want to call them, don't have access to federal social safety net programs because they don't have social security number. They can't get food stamps, they can't get housing assistance, they can't get any of this. And so some states, some cities have recognized this and said, hey guys, we're going to do the morally right thing and provide them with something so they aren't just like starving, or going into extreme medical debt or not having access to medical care at all. You could be against those states or those cities making those policies, but like that doesn't mean that you would have to try and punish them for it. This is them trying to punish them for it. That's why this is, I think, goes beyond any like amount of. There's no plausible deniability of this. This is just cruelty. This is just sick. They're trying to punish these states and these cities for trying to help people, literally punish them, and not punish them, punish the citizens, right? Who is going to punish most if they do this? So California, for instance, I don't know if they actually have done this, but let's say LA and a couple cities in California implement their own illegal immigrant medical programs that allow them to access a Medicaid-esque sort of thing. And then the federal government is like, all right, we're going to cut your Medicaid funding by 50% because you're doing that. Who is the who where does the road end when you cut that 50%? Well, the road ends at the poor people that live in California that are going to have less access to healthcare and are going to have to take on medical debt and whatnot. Those are the people that are going to be hurt by this. It's not the Democratic lawmakers in California that you are ostensibly against for implementing this kind of policy. It is the citizens themselves, which is just sick. The legislation would bar Medicaid from providing funding to Planned Parenthood as long as the organization continued to provide abortions, and the bill would limit strategies that states have developed to tax medical providers and pay them higher prices for Medicaid services. I don't know how much Planned Parenthood is funded by Medicaid currently. I don't think it's funded really at all. So I guess they're basically saying you wouldn't be allowed to use Medicaid dollars at Planned Parenthood if they continue to provide abortions. This seems antithetical to the whole, all the Republicans out there saying like it's a states issue, leave it to the states, blah blah blah. I think this is where it needs to be. But then they're going to go around and try and from top down, from the big bad government, try and punish those that have abortions in their state via Planned Parenthood, which is just very hypocritical. Taken together with policies that would affect private Obamacare coverage, the Congressional Budget Office estimated that the legislation would cause 8.6 million more Americans to be uninsured at the end of a decade, while reducing federal spending on health care by more than $700 billion. That estimate may be updated in the coming weeks as the office continues to analyze the bill. Yeah, that seems consistent to me. Democrats have made the Medicaid changes the main focus of their critique of the bill, arguing that Republicans are slashing health coverage for poor Americans to finance tax cuts for the rich. Is there really any other interpretation of what they're doing than that? I can't think of that is the objective correct interpretation of what is happening. There is no other interpretation. In an effort to insulate their most vulnerable incumbents from backlash, GOP leaders omitted overhaul proposals that would have permanently changed the structure of the program. But one populist Republican, Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, has called the cuts a non-starter, saying they amount to taxing the poor to give to the rich. And some conservative lawmakers in the House who wanted much larger reductions are disappointed with the scale of the changes and the delayed implementation of the work requirement. It is so weird seeing Republicans say that because I feel like that is really, really a diamond in the rough. I'm not saying Josh Hawley is good, but the idea that this is really like a white elephant. Um, this is really standout that there's a Republican senator that's saying the words taxing the poor, criticizing a tax cut bill like this and changes to Medicaid and whatnot, saying it's taxing the poor and giving to the rich. That is so like I don't know if I've ever seen a Republican ever say anything even close to this. That's crazy. That's crazy. The bill would sharply curtail most of the big tax credits for clean energy contained in the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Many of those incentives were expected to last a decade and have so far led businesses to announce more than $841 billion in investments, from wind farms in Wyoming to battery factories in Georgia. Those seem like great things because not only are they furthering green energy and a moving away from fossil fuels, which seems like just objectively what we have to do moving forward, but also it is a humongous investment and a lot of money pumping right back into those local economies. That $841 billion goes right back into American companies, right back into the local economies. This seems like nothing but a win-win having this sort of thing. So taking it away seems ridiculous and completely illogical and devoid of any serious reasoning. Among the major changes, a $7,500 tax break for buyers of electric cars would largely phase out by the end of 2025, with a one-year extension for automakers that have not sold many models yet. Tax credits for low emissions electricity Tax credits for low emissions electricity sources like wind, solar, nuclear, and geothermal power would be available in full only to power plants in service before the end of 2028 and then would zero out within 3 years. Credit for making hydrogen fuels would end this year. Okay, so yeah, so they're just trying to remove all potential tax credits or breaks or incentives to doing anything but fossil fuels, because that seems like what they're not only attacking like solar because they don't like the look of the panels, or they're not attacking wind because they don't like the look of the windmills or whatever silly argument I've heard these people try and make before, but they're going after hydrogen fuels and they're going after geothermal power, and they're just going after everything, which is just weird. Like, why would you? Even if you believe climate change isn't real, what is the like? We're gonna eventually run out of oil, right? Like, why wouldn't you want to move to a more sustainable fuel source or a more sustainable energy creation method? The negatives of moving away from fossil fuels are what are the negatives, right? The fossil fuel companies don't make as much money. Like I legit can't think of any other serious negatives other than what some people making less money. some rich people making less money. The bill would also impose new foreign entity of concern restrictions on tax breaks for both power plants and factories that build solar panels, batteries, or other low carbon technologies by disqualifying companies that use components from China. But like I don't think we don't manufacture everything here to create a power plant. It seems crazy. We can't say you can't use anything from China. Components from it just says use components from China. That means any components from China. That seems crazy to me. Why would you want to? I understand the argument of strategic. There's strategic military arguments for having certain amounts of manufacturing be done domestic, but to say that we need literally every component necessary to create a power plant needs to be made here is ridiculous. That's a steep hurdle since China dominates global supply chains. The bill would also end by 2028 a practice that allowed smaller firms with little tax liability to claim the credits and sell them for cash, making the incentives more widely accessible. I can understand I understand carbon tax. Like I'm familiar with the concept of a carbon tax. I know what this is. This isn't what this is, but I'm just giving this as an example. I'm familiar with the concept of a carbon tax and that um you in a lot of these carbon tax models you can buy and sell the carbon tax credits, and that market system plays a big role in making it work the way it should work. I understand that. I don't understand how that would work with something like a tax liability. Not all energy sources were affected. Tax credit for biofuels, which is popular in farm states, received a 4-year extension in the bill. Okay, so yes, basically, which is popular in farm states, aka the Republican conservative states. So basically, they're like, we know we have. They very cynically are like, we know we have these biofuels are popular here, so we're gonna allow that. We're gonna make a special carve out for that, but everything else, it's nothing because it doesn't benefit us or our constituency directly or whatever. And a credit for capturing carbon dioxide from polluting facilities and burying it underground, which is backed by oil and gas companies, was mostly kept intact. Other portions of the bill would expedite federal approvals for oil and gas projects in exchange for up to $10 million in fees, scrap Biden era rules on tailpipe pollution from cars and trucks, and repeal an EPA program aimed at curbing methane leaks from oil and gas operations. The legislation also pulls back unspent funds from the Energy Department's Loan Programs Office, which has nearly $400 billion in lending authority for emerging technologies. We talked about that earlier, the Loan Programs Office so I guess they effectively kneecapped the loan programs office earlier by creating this weird incentive system where they basically said like, I think the loan programs office only has something like 200 employees, and they told them like, hey guys, we're probably going to fire you in the future. We're going to offer you a 6-month severance if you retire right now. And my understanding was over 50% of those 200 employees took the offer. And so over half the employees at the loan programs office just went away overnight, which basically kneecapped their ability to do anything. So that, as far as I understand, they've been pretty stagnant in their ability to do anything for the last 3 or 4 months. And I guess this will do the proper final death blow by removing any unspent, unappropriated funding that they would have used otherwise. Slashing the energy credits has been contentious even among Republicans, since more than 3/4 of the investment driven by the Inflation Reduction Act have occurred in red states. At least 3 dozen Republicans in the House and 4 in the Senate have spoken out in favor of preserving at least some of the incentives, such as for nuclear power or domestic manufacturing, to protect jobs and bolster U.S. energy security. In a bid to save money and restrict benefits, the bill would make a series of changes to scale back the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, which provides monthly aid known as food stamps to about 42 million low income people. Under the proposal, food stamp recipients between the ages of 18 and 64 would have to obtain work in order to receive federal aid. That mandate would also apply to parents with children 7 and older. Current law subjects only beneficiaries up to age 54 to work requirements and carves out parents with dependents. I love the idea I don't actually love, I say that sarcastically. I love the idea that that if you don't work, that as society from the top down, from the government themselves, which is supposed to be the representation of the people, says if you aren't working, you deserve to starve. That's basically what this is saying. Um I don't think there should be any work requirements on food stamps. Food stamps are such a cheap program in comparison to the amount of benefit that it provides. I mean, food is like the base level of Maslow's hierarchy, right? It's like food, shelter, water. like the idea that we even have work requirements at all on it in the United States, where we have more than the ability to provide food stamps to everybody who wants them, is just sad. Additionally, the bill would force states to shoulder some of the costs of SNAP, which historically have been funded by the federal government. It's because it's a federal program. Some of these states, I'm pretty sure, have like their own pseudo statewide SNAP programs that to like supplement the federal program. So the idea that you're gonna pass some of the cost off onto the states is just, you might as well be cutting the program. But that is effectively a cut for the program, because it's going to take from those states' ability to provide SNAP themselves, or their own versions of SNAP or whatever. So it's effectively a cut when they're saying they're some of the states are going to shoulder some of the cost or whatever. It would limit the ability of future administrations to raise food stamp benefit amounts. It would limit the ability of how does that? I don't understand how that makes sense. I'd need to see the exact wording to see what it means by limit the. But this is I don't understand what motivates legislators, Congress people, to do these sort of preemptive bills. You saw this in Texas with like um construction breaks. So like there were some cities in Texas that passed rules saying like, hey, construction workers are required to have X number of breaks over X number of hours of work, um, with the consideration that it's over 100 degrees a lot of the time here in Texas, and that it's sweltering. And the idea that you're gonna be forced to work 6 hours in a row without a break is, in 110-degree weather while you're wearing a bunch of construction equipment, is just cruel. But the Texas legislature or the governor or whatever themselves like was like, hey, we don't like this. We they implemented it was either an executive order by the governor, or it was passed by the legislature, but a rule that says like cities are not allowed to pass their own rules on this. Basically, that like if you're in Austin, and as the city of Austin you want to decide that you want to implement this mandatory break rule for construction workers, the state has come in and said you are not allowed to do that. You are not those people, if their employer says they're not allowed to break, they're not allowed to break. Damn it! I don't know why they do this. It's like pure virtue signaling, because couldn't you always create a bill that comes back and just like, yeah, I just have another bill. I'm gonna write another bill that just basically erases this whole bill, which this bill was supposed to restrict our ability to do this thing in the future. It's just like, and also it's such a morally bad look. Like, why would you want to restrict the ability for us to expand food stamps in the future? Just think about that for 5 seconds, right? Food stamps go to poor people. These these legislators are legitimately sitting around going, not only do we want to cut these poor people's access to food in a very material, legitimate way by cutting food stamps and SNAP and whatnot, but we want to restrict their ability to fix this and to provide it in the future, right? That's how important taking food away from poor people is to us. And SNAP would be restricted to U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents. It already is. My understanding is you cannot receive SNAP without federal documentation like a social security number or birth certificate or something like that. So my understanding is this is. Hold on. Let me Google that really quick. Okay, so anybody here legally can receive SNAP benefits. So if you're a refugee, if you're in the asylum process, if you're in the refugee process, if you're a victim of trafficking, if all of these are eligible for SNAP. So the only people who are uneligible for SNAP are people who are here illegally and have not met any of these qualifications. Okay, so this is a restriction on SNAP. So it would make it so it's U.S. and lawful permanent residents. So not lawful residents. So if you're in the asylum process or you're in the refugee process or you're halfway through getting your green card, you would not be eligible to receive SNAP. But if you're a permanent lawful resident or U.S. citizen, then you would. By Wednesday, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office had released an analysis about the full effects of these and other changes. Past reports about similar proposals have found that strict work requirements could result in millions of food stamp recipients losing access to benefits. The changes to SNAP would also have indirect effects on school nutrition programs. Many children automatically qualify for free lunches because their families are eligible for SNAP. Poor children whose parents lose SNAP coverage under the legislation would have to individually apply. Reductions in SNAP enrollment would also affect which public schools qualify for universal free lunch programs, which rely on the share of neighborhood families with nutrition benefits. Interesting. So I didn't know. So there can be a serious cascading effect by this. You know, people lose their access to SNAP, and then children are because their parents lost the SNAP, they're going to lose their access to school lunches, and because enough people in the neighborhood have lost access to SNAP, then the school itself will lose access its right to receive universal free lunch program funding or whatever. It seems like they're actually much more than I would have initially expected. There is a cascade effect to cutting SNAP like this. It's not going to just take food away from poor people. It's going to do so on a much broader, more gross scale. Some Republicans from districts with high concentrations of food stamp recipients have balked in past at cuts to the program and insisted on allowing states to relax work requirements, which the bill would limit their ability to do. But so far, there has been no outcry in the GOP against the SNAP cuts. I think, to me, that's indicative of the cruelty streak that the GOP has right now. Not only is the Republican Party become the MAGA party at this point, but like completely separate from that, there has been a sort of like a cruelty, a disdain for empathy that has that has just permeated the Republican Party, and I would argue has become a core tenet of it at this point. It doesn't seem surprising in that sense that there are no more Republicans out there that are um, against this because the cruelty factor has permeated so much, and this fulfills that too well. It's too cruel to say no to. Basically, they love cruelty, and this is too cruel to say no to. Basically, even if it might undermine some, even if in the past, before this cruelty factor was really there, they might have been against this. The plan would devote an additional $150 billion in military spending to help boost shipbuilding efforts and to build a new space-based missile defense system Mr. Trump has proposed that the military is calling Golden Dome. The idea that we could create a missile defense system that covers the entirety of the United States or really any significant landmass is crazy. The Iron Dome, which I guess this is sort of named after in Israel, is only for really short range rockets. The Iron Dome only works on little pot rockets that are made like by from sewage pipes that have no guidance system and are being fired from 20, 50 kilometers away. When they have actual ballistic missiles coming from, like when they had that missile attack from Iran, the Iron Dome is not what shoots those down. It's a completely different missile defense system. And so the idea that you could have an Iron Dome esque defense system over the United States is both impractical in terms of how you would do it. You would need so much, it would be so much equipment, it's insane. But also, there's no need for it. Are we really at risk of a missile attack in the United States or a short range rocket attack? What are those across, what are the Canadians in Toronto going to start flinging little rockets across to New York? No, I don't even understand why. What would be the reasoning for this? Plus, don't we already have like my understanding is that it would probably make more sense to put those kind of systems in place like Greenland, where most of the missiles, if they're fired from the other side of the world, would fly over the North Pole and they would go right by Greenland, and that's where we'd shoot them down. It wouldn't make sense to put that sort of thing here. I don't know. I'm very, very much against spending hundreds of billions of dollars on a completely useless missile defense system. It also includes I also wouldn't be surprised if, like, if this is one of those things where, like, Trump loves the idea of it for some reason. He loves the idea of creating an Iron Dome missile defense system over the United States. Then the military people behind the scenes are like, "Bro, what are you talking about? Are you crazy? This is not a this is not a serious proposal." And so they just called it something off like the Golden Dome or whatever. And that there's actually no real there's nothing serious behind this. I would not be surprised. It also includes about $175 billion in new spending to enforce Mr. Trump's ambitious anti-immigration agenda, including for bulking up the barriers at the nation's southern border and for additional Border Patrol agents and facilities. These measures are considered the least controversial in the legislative package and are meant to entice Republicans to vote for it. $175 billion to enforce anti-immigration agenda is crazy. It's so much money. How could they possibly be trying to cut SNAP benefits and Medicaid benefits and programs that have tangible, real effects on people? How could they, with a straight face, be wanting to cut those and claim the reason is budgetary? And then on the other hand, approve $175 billion for Trump to enforce immigration stuff. Like, basically, I would expect most of that to go towards building a wall and what paying ICE agents salaries. Like, it's so cynical. It's so cynical. These are not good faith actors. These are not good faith actors. There's no serious person who is seriously concerned about the budget deficit of the United States that would advocate for, and also cares about the well-being of the citizenry, that would advocate for cutting Medicaid and SNAP, and at the same time advocate for funding $175 billion for Trump's immigration nonsense. It's just it's beyond it's beyond satire, right? It's just beyond satire. It's just crazy to even imagine. It's so cynical. It really hurts to see these people that have control. These legislators have the levers they have access to pull are like the levers that control people's lives. And it's so sad and so cynical and so just disheartening to see these people that have found themselves at the top of the pyramid, that have access to all the levers that control everything about your life, and that they are actively trying to do it. They are not interested one bit in the well-being of the people. One, they are interested explicitly in their weird ideology and unnuanced principles, and that is it, bar none. The bill would slice $330 billion out of student loan spending over a decade. The biggest change would eliminate for new borrowers the Biden-era student loan repayment program known as SAVE, which ties loan payments to income and household size, as well as the pay-as-you-earn plan and the income contingent repayment plan. It would replace those with a single repayment plan that would be more costly for many students. Total federal loan amounts would be capped by year and by program for graduate student loans, and new limits would be placed on how much parents can borrow to pay for their children's tuition. The bill also would make it more difficult for part-time students to obtain Pell Grants, increasing the number of credits per semester required for the maximum award for 12 to 15. That seems crazy to me because a lot of the people that need Pell Grants the most are those that are working while they're at school. A lot of the people that are lower on the socioeconomic ladder that find themselves in college have to work a part-time or a full-time job at the same time, which makes it especially hard to take a full 15-hour class load every semester. Because this isn't just like a, you know, this has to be every semester. Otherwise, you would lose your ability to receive the full Pell Grant for a semester, and that can affect the coming semesters. The same people that would potentially be at 12 hours a week because they have a part-time or a full-time job, and reaching 15 hours a week while working a full-time job is like it's hard to give enough effort into school at the same time. Um, this seems like this attacks the exact kind of people that need it most. Um, and I can I It seems illogical to want to raise it for 12 to 15 because of the reasons I just laid out, and requiring them to be enrolled at least half of the time to qualify at all. But it would allow Pell Grants to be used for shorter term programs that earn students professional certifications. So I guess they're saying that they would allow Pell Grants to now be used for trade schools and whatnot. I guess on the surface, I'm okay with that, but I could see there potentially being problems with that. Right, just like not all universities are created equally, I would imagine not all trade certification programs are created equally, and to the extent that some of them are predatory, I would imagine there are more examples of predatory trade certification programs than there are of cynical predatory universities. At least we're talking in amounts of degrees here. But in theory, on the surface, I'm not against that idea. I think that might actually be a good idea on the surface. The legislation would increase the nation's statutory debt limit by $4 trillion. The Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said earlier this month that the United States could run out of money to pay its bills by August if Congress does not raise or suspend the nation's debt limit. Bro, $4 trillion. The Republican Party is actually truly dead if they were to get this passed. If they were to pass simultaneously a raising the debt ceiling by $4 trillion and handing Trump 175 billion dollars for immigration enforcement and cut Social Security and or cut Medicaid and a bunch of other stuff and SNAP, um, this is the death of the Republican Party, right? No, if you went 20 plus years ago, there is no Republican, no fiscal conservative that would even slightly entertain the idea of raising the debt ceiling by $4 trillion, okay? Especially at the same time that they're talking about cutting these programs that materially like improve people's lives. Nobody can call themselves a fiscal conservative and at the same time support raising the debt ceiling by $4 trillion and giving Trump $175 billion for immigration enforcement. Those are literally completely antithetical concepts. You could not be a fiscal conservative and advocate and support these at the same time. It's impossible. And so if this were to pass, I'm calling it right here, right now. It is the full, like, I think the Republican Party has been dead for a number of years, but it is truly, truly the death of the Republican Party. In my mind, it will be a bookend. It will be a bookend to the Republican Party and a book end and a book beginning to the MAGA Party or to the Cruelty Party or whatever you want to call this, the lack of reason party. That I've lost my mind completely party. The legislation would increase the nation's statutory debt limit by $4 trillion. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said earlier this month that the United States could run out of its money to pay blah, blah, blah. Many ultra-conservative Republicans have long prided themselves on refusing to back any increase to the nation's borrowing cap and have refused to do so in December, even at Mr. Trump's urging. But some have conceded they would rather raise the debt limit through the reconciliation bill, which allows them to pass legislation without a single Democratic vote to deprive the minority party of any negotiating leverage. Okay, so basically these fiscal conservatives are saying, we are willing to put aside our principles and the things we care about because this is just such a good opportunity um, to get these things done, to get to get the cruel things done. We're willing to put aside the principles that might be good. Maybe we're gonna put aside the principles that might be good for the principles that are just disgusting. The cruelty principle. Okay, so here's a little bit more on this. I'll read this one really quickly and see if it has any more information. A budget bill long touted by Donald Trump as the big beautiful bill hit a roadblock on Friday when lawmakers from the president's own party voted against it in Congress. 5 Republicans joined all Democrats in delivering a stunning setback to President Trump's domestic agenda, demanding deeper budget cuts. Trump, who has muscled through close votes several times this year, urged lawmakers to unite behind the legislation. We don't need grandstanders in the Republican Party. Stop. I have to read it in his voice. We don't need grandstanders in the Republican Party. Stop talking and get it done, he posted on Truth Social. The bill's chances of success are not hopeless, but its failure gives the Trump administration its first legislative bruise of the year. Support for the bill among Republicans varies. Some hardliners want to see the budget cuts go further, while other Republicans have expressed concerns about cuts to programs like Medicaid, which their constituents are dependent upon. The 5 Republicans who voted against the measure in the procedural vote said they would continue to withhold support unless Speaker Mike Johnson agreed to further cut Medicaid, a health care program for lower-income Americans. Wait, 5 Republicans who voted against the measure in the procedural vote said they would continue to withhold support unless Speaker Mike Johnson agreed to further cut Medicaid, a health care program for lower-income Americans. So these 5 Republicans are holding out because this bill wasn't cruel enough, because it didn't cut poor people's healthcare enough, because it didn't restrict poor people's access to healthcare and increase the amount of money that bankers are going to make via medical bankruptcy debt or whatever. That is why they don't want to support this. Not because it's going to take away um, medical care from poor people, not because it's going to create more medical debt, not because it's going to tangibly make people's lives worse. They want to make their lives even worse than their bill they're proposing will do. They also want Johnson to include a full repeal of green energy tax cuts implemented by Democrats in the bill. This bill falls profoundly short, said Texas Republican Chip Roy, who voted against the measure. It does not do what we say it does with it does not do what we say with respects to deficits. But wait a minute. Where is the it does not do what we say with respect to deficits? Where is that comment when it comes to the $175 billion they want to give to Trump for immigration enforcement, huh? Like, that is going to make a huge effect on the deficit. The proposed legislation would extend tax cuts implemented during Trump's first administration. While Trump touts the bill's inclusion of a no tax on tips policy, some critics argue the bill benefits wealthy Americans. Democrats, who overwhelmingly oppose the bill, have been urging the reconsideration of Medicaid cuts and spending cuts to the Affordable Care Act, which offers millions of Americans subsidized health insurance. No other previous bill, no other previous law, no other previous event caused so many millions of Americans to lose their health care. Not even the Great Depression, Pennsylvania Democrat Brendan Boyle said. If passed, the tax cuts would cost $3.72 trillion over 10 years, according to Congress's bipartisan Joint Tax Committee. The tax cuts would cost $3.72 trillion. Okay, yeah, so they're reducing our tax revenue by $3.72 trillion. No serious person, no person who's a fiscal conservative or who cares at all about the budget or the deficit or the debt in any legitimate, serious way, um, can be in favor of this whole package. It doesn't make sense. Um, I think this is a perfect example of Daddy Trump's in charge, baby. It's the Trump party. It's the MAGA party. What Daddy Trump says, what Daddy Trump says, Daddy, it goes. And if he wants this bill passed, it is political suicide for these Republicans to be against it, even if it goes against their, what used to be the core tenets of the Republican Party, which was fiscal conservatism. That's not the core tenet anymore. The core tenet is cruelty, and fiscal conservatism is more than willing for them. They're more than willing to let fiscal conservatism take a back seat to this cruelty principle.